It's what my character would do. If you're new to D&D, that sentence probably doesn't mean anything to you. But this is actually one of the most loaded sentences in the gaming community. For some D&D players, it sends a shiver down our spines as we just know that some jerk is using it to excuse their poor behavior at the table. But for others, this is a totally valid argument, and in theory, it's not difficult to see why. If this is a role-playing game and you are just playing your character, how can people reasonably get mad about that? And some players and some groups actually really enjoy having situations where their characters do something they wouldn't personally do, or their characters disagree with each other, or disagree with what the players would do, because they don't take it personally. It's just a game. So how can we get moments like this?
Leave no trace.
No, I'm taking this.
Put it back, or
I'm taking this. Isn't worth my time. I'm taking this.
Without getting moments like this.
You're a dick.
Because there is a way to execute your vision for your character and have dramatic and cool things happen at the table, but to do so in a way that doesn't piss off any of the real-life human beings you're playing with. So let's talk about that. First, we have to acknowledge that there are some things that some D&D players clearly think is acceptable to happen or talk about at their table, and others don't want in the game at all. That's why having a session 0 is so important. We'll use inter-party conflict as our example for today's video, because any other examples that people might deal with could be potentially triggering or upsetting. But just know that there are all sorts of behaviors at a table, including levels of violence, language, sexual content, that could easily be justified with the "it's what my character would do" defense, but that can alienate or upset other players. And all of them can be covered using the same safety tools. So let's use this inter-party conflict example. For some players, any idea of inter-party conflict where the player characters disagree, fight verbally or physically, is a huge issue for them, while others find that it's the most excitement they can have at the table. I'm personally in the latter camp, by the way. But I also totally respect that having that conflict between player characters, in and of itself, even with all the safety tools in place, crosses a line for some other players. So that's why this is a Session 0 conversation. One of these days, I really am going to get around to making that Session 0 video, but I keep stumbling upon other topics that I realize, oh, this also needs to go into the Session 0 video, much like this one. But really, this is the first step to what we're talking about today. Making sure that your players are comfortable with the idea of characters arguing in character, in this example. And by the way, this is something that anyone has a right to change their minds about at any point during the campaign. Especially if somebody is a new player or new to playing with this specific group of people, and they may not have had an accurate mental image of what this would look like or feel like when it actually happened in the game. D&D is not like a board game. The emotions at the table can feel extremely real. And while I'm personally someone who enjoys dipping into those extreme emotions in the safe context of a role-playing game, that is not for everybody. And it's not what everyone comes to the game for. And so, if after an argument between your player characters, one of the players says, "Hey, I did not enjoy that. I don't think I want to have conflict with the other players or player characters anymore." It's the responsibility of everyone at the table to respect that boundary. Because, first and foremost, this is a game you play with your friends, and nothing in the game should be more important than making sure that you don't upset your friends. If you think the game is more important than your friends' boundaries, then you're not just a bad friend, you're a bad D&D player. That's like a knife thrower in the circus trying to prove how hard he can throw the knife. So he throws it so hard it goes all the way through the volunteer and out the other side of the board. You have fully missed the objective of this exercise, and the thing you're doing now is something that we all agreed a long time ago we did not want to do. But let's say that everybody is on the same page about player conflict at the table. Mistakes can still happen during a game. Somebody can still do something that upsets another player. But you should be covered by the fact that you discussed it at your Session 0, so you can say, "Hey, I'm sure it was an accident, but we all agreed we weren't going to do that." Brennan Lee Mulligan discussed this in an interview with the Dungeon Dudes, and he pointed out that if you have the conversation before the campaign, then when something happens at the table, you're not trying to make an argument right now to define standards and decide what's acceptable. You're just saying, here's what we all agreed to, just a reminder that this crosses that line. Somebody might have forgotten, or they might not have realized that what they said would cross that line for someone else. Or maybe they just didn't realize that what they did was covered by that topic. Mistakes and misunderstandings can always happen. And we can be understanding of that. After all, you are playing a game with your friends. And if everybody did agree to the same rules at the beginning of the session, then all you need to do is issue that player a gentle reminder, and then course correct the session. But there are still plenty of things that a player can do at the table that don't technically cross the lines and veils on a consent form, but still feel like a jerk move. This is where we get into the muddled territory and the kind of stuff that is so often justified with the "it's what my character would do" defense. Here are the two most common versions of this that I have seen: hoarding magic items or other loot, and having your character not want to participate in the adventure or mission or fight. Now, there could be a lot of reasons, both in character and out of character, for this behavior. Sometimes I see this labeled as metagaming, other times I see it as competitive play, but I don't think it's always as simple as that. It could be because you really, really like your character and you don't want them to get hurt. It could be that you just think it's more interesting and dramatic, and in order to tell a convincing story about character growth, you have to have a little bit of selfish behavior at the beginning of the character's arc. It could be that the elements of your backstory reasonably led to this sort of behavior, but this kind of behavior at the table can be really disruptive. And when you say that this is what your character would do, then the most common response is, then why did you make a character who would do that? Because D&D is a collaborative game, but so often, character creation is a solo activity. Even if everybody comes to the session 0 with no character sheets and they all roll their stats right there at the table, it's really common for everybody to come to that session with an idea for their character, or just to consider that character in a vacuum, either before the session 0 or before the first session. I made a video about this before with a bunch of questions that DMs can ask their players to better understand their characters. But notably, none of those questions or exercises involve the other players or the other characters in any meaningful way. That's the mindset that so many of us have when we're thinking about our characters, and clearly I'm as guilty of that as anybody. If you've followed this channel for a while, you've seen my D&D Beyond page of dozens and dozens of characters just waiting for the right campaign for me to play them. And while I do give a lot of thought when I'm joining a campaign about what characters might balance well with the others, either in terms of the mechanics of the game or more often the personalities at play, that way I can fill a need in the group or have a fun dynamic with the other characters. These characters all still originated with concepts that focused on just my character. And it can be really hard to shake the idea that your character is important or that your character's story is important. Which it is, but not at the expense of the others at the table. In its worst form, this is referred to as main character syndrome, where your behavior at the table makes the other players feel like you don't respect or value their characters or their character storylines. But the reason this is so easy to fall into in D&D is because of how we all think about our characters individually. Now, unfortunately, that is not really going to be a problem I'm going to be able to solve today. I'm not going to solve the way that D&D culture puts individual characters first because I don't really have a solution for that right now. But what I can tell you is there is some behavior that you can employ at the table that will make other players uncomfortable. It may not cross their lines or veils, but it still works against the fun of the other players. The biggest two for me are these. When you declare that you know best about what should be done with magic items or with loot, or when you feel like the adventure is not worth the time or the risk. So you either resist going on it at all, or you do go on the adventure, but you put up quite a stink throughout. Now, this is not the same as having issues with a plan. You can object or criticize a plan all day. I mean, try to offer constructive criticism instead of just shutting things down, but that's good life advice in general. Because that way you'll be making your issues with the plan clear, but you'll also still be helping. And that's going to be much more successful at getting you whatever it is that you want. But if you are fully going to claim that your character does not care, or does not want to risk themselves in this adventure, then it's time to remind you. This is a game. You agreed to play a game with your friends. Your friends want to play the game. Your DM prepared material to play the game. If you're the one person saying, my character would not do this, and you cannot offer any alternate plan that your character would be on board with, then really, it's a fair question. Why did you create the character? Now, it can feel unfair when people levy that accusation against you, and I get it. But this ultimately is why a Session 0 is so important. Because if you all create your characters together, and you make sure that you all understand why your characters are working together, your character can actually be designed to fit with the adventure in advance. Because this is part of the social contract when you agree to play D&D. You definitely do not have to do exactly what the DM has prepared. That's not part of the issue. But if everybody else has agreed to do the adventure, and you're the only holdout, that's kind of poor sportsmanship. Because you're at the table with your friends. This is the activity that you all agreed to do. That's like going to a movie with your friends, and then as soon as they tear the tickets, you say, I want to go ice skating. If no one else agrees to go with you, that's not what you're doing. As for hoarding wealth or magic items, this is the other category that I see poor behavior fall into, which is taking away the agency of the other players. Unless you know it's okay with the other players, you should not be making decisions on their behalf about material goods. Especially because in a game like D&D, money and magic items are one of the few clear metrics of your character's progression and advancement. And if your character hoards the items, rather than giving the other players a chance to decide whether or not they want to have the items instead, it actively pushes against one of the core fantasies that inspires people to play D&D. That's why it's considered such a faux pas. However, there are some tables where the most important thing is the role-playing. And so it's hard for me to say conclusively that there are any hard and fast rules, when any of these rules, anything that I've said, can be broken or violated in exchange for a good story, as long as everyone else is on board with it. And there is a technique that you can use to feel out the situation before committing to a course of action. And by using this approach, you actually make it much more likely that the other players will be on board with something that you want to do in character, even if it is ordinarily something that is never allowed in a game of D&D. But even if you are doing something that is theoretically in character and not disruptive, the other players not knowing why you're doing what you're doing could be the entire problem. For example, let's say that your character searches a room and finds some documents, and then the DM tells you, because of what you read in the documents, some critical information about the villain. You find out the villain's weakness. The other players look at you excited. Now we have the info that we need. And then your character burns the documents. And when your character reunites with the rest of the party, you say nothing. Wait, the other players say, are you seriously not going to tell us what you found out? No, you say, you guys don't know any of that. But why? Because it's what my character would do. What you're doing might be totally valid and completely motivated by the character that you're playing. But the other players don't understand what you're doing, and that frustrates them. Just like objecting to an adventure or hoarding wealth, you're not crossing any lines or veils on a consent form, but this is still behavior that frustrates the other players. But you think that's dramatic and cool, because the document is written by your long-lost brother, the rightful heir to your family throne, and everyone else assumes that character is dead. But, none of the other players know that. But what if they did? So here's my simple technique, and I have found that it works extremely well. Before your character does something that could be in any way disruptive, even slightly, describe your character's mental state. So Octavio reads the letter, and at first, he's really excited because now we actually have a way to fight Bastion the Bitter. But then he sees who wrote the letter, and he realizes nobody else can ever see this piece of paper. And he takes out his flint, and he's going to burn the letter. Notice how much more information the players have now. They know that your character is not working against them. You're not secretly working for the villain or hoping that the party will fail. They don't actually get any other information about your backstory, but they do know that something is going on. And that's exciting. And then, this part is actually really important, you tell them what you are going to do. Use future tense. Now, sometimes what will happen is that the players will try to justify their characters going into the room at that exact moment, to disrupt the scene, or influence your decision, or discover the secret. That's up to the DM to adjudicate based on what is most dramatically interesting and what makes the most sense. And I'm going to do a whole other video about this, because there is a specific movie that can actually teach us a lot about how to adjudicate a situation like this. But more on that another time. But hopefully, everyone at the table will realize that what you're doing is not playing the game selfishly. You're just adding a wrinkle to the story, or technically reacting to a wrinkle that your DM added to the story, in a way that feels plausible and justified. But what is important about using future tense is that you are giving the other players a warning, almost like a countdown. That allows them to get their head around what your character is about to do before you actually do it. And that is really valuable. It gives them a chance to speak up out of character, maybe to ask questions if they don't fully understand what you're doing, or to jump in and make sure that you've considered all the facts before going down this course of action. This technique can also help you have your cake and eat it too when it comes to some of the earlier examples. Rather than have your character sit out the mission entirely, you can have the debate, push back against plans or objectives that don't make any sense to you, etc., whatever. But then you just say, out of character, as we gear up, Octavio is really worried about this plan. He does not think that this is a good idea. He thinks they're going to die. He looks back at the road east, and he thinks about just going off on his own, going back to the Green Towers. And then he puts his bag on his shoulder, sighs, and he follows the rest of the party west towards the Grey Keep. You still got to have a dramatic moment where your character's loyalties and motivations were in question, or at the very least you were expressing your concerns, but then you got to keep playing the game with your friends. And you don't need to use flowery language or speak in character to do this. You don't even need to speak in first person. I am doing this, I am doing that. In fact, I would almost encourage you to speak in third person when you are employing this technique at your table, because that can help make it really clear that there is a difference between what you are feeling and what your character is feeling. And don't be afraid to spell it out to make sure that you are communicating as clearly as possible with the other players. Octavio is really worried about this because he feels like if anybody finds out that he made a deal with the Thieves Guild, his chance to ascend to the throne could be in jeopardy. I'm personally fine with the deal because I think this NPC is the coolest person we've ever met and this mission sounds amazing, so if Octavio loses the vote, that's totally fine with me. And if you approach your characters that way, it can be really, really helpful to keep things in perspective when you play. It helps you find peace in your character's failings and failures, rather than living or dying by every die roll, every combat, every in-person character argument. The reason "it's what my character would do" has become such a memed turn of phrase, and is always associated with problem players, is because it's only said when players are challenging each other on something their character did that did not make sense to the other players. And usually, about doing something that harms the fun of the other people at the table. And the only way I can think of to make sure that that does not happen is to improve communication in your game. In part, this can be resolved by using a session zero and safety tools, and making sure that everybody's role-playing lines up with what the other players are expecting and hoping for. But this technique can also help, because if you can clearly articulate your character's motivations and why they are doing what they're doing, and distinguish between how you feel and how your character feels, the more you can communicate in a healthy way with your fellow players, and the better everybody's experience will be. If your group uses the traffic light safety tool, which we will talk about another day, you can hold up the green traffic light during a character conflict to make sure the other players understand that you are just playing your role, that this is not personal. But not to discount the value of those sort of structured safety tools, I really recommend you just speak it out loud to remove any sense of ambiguity. I have played with people who made sure before they opened their mouths in character in any way that would cause conflict with the other players at the table, they basically out loud asked for permission in advance. And the characters in that campaign had some intense arguments, like philosophical, moral arguments about the nature of adventuring, like Captain America and Iron Man in the MCU. And it was wonderful, because everybody at the table knew that this was entirely motivated by our characters, and it was not some shared personal opinions of the other players that we were harboring. And I personally think that this is the best way to handle cool, dramatic stuff in your game, and the only way you can be sure that no one is going to take it personally. TTRPGs are not competitive by nature, but they can be just as emotional as any other game, or any piece of media, or any real-life experience. And we need to make sure that we treat each other with care, because it can be very easy for things that we say or do in a D&D game to land in a way that we did not expect with the other players. And this approach can really help remove the chance that you're going to come across like a jerk at the table. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about new videos whenever they come out on Mondays and Thursdays. You can join the Patreon. Any dollar amount really helps the channel. But also, the more people join, the more this channel can improve. I have milestones and goals that will only get better if more people join. So even if you just join at $3 a month or $1 a month, it really actually will have a tangible effect on making this channel better. The third way you can support is by joining the Discord, where a bunch of really cool people are hanging out and talking about D&D and tabletop games and actual play and putting together groups and sharing advice. It's wonderful. And the fourth way you can support me is by signing up for my newsletter and getting occasional updates about what I've got going on. All those links are in the doobly-doo below. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.